Good afternoon. My name's Kate Kiewel with Bicycle Capital. We're a growth equity firm focused on Latin America. It's wonderful to welcome all of you to the early and growth stage panel on Latin America. We have 3 seasoned investors here that all know each other well and the market well to share the trends, the opportunity, and really why we all have conviction on the region. I'd love to welcome Lara to introduce herself, and then would love each panelist to just introduce themselves and their firms and their focus areas, and then we'll get on to the panel.
Perfect. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you for the invitation. Very briefly on myself. So I'm Lara. I'm the founder of Nyatta Capital. We're an early stage fund based out of Brazil that invests in pre-seed and seed companies across Latin America. We're currently managing around 150 million in AUM. Deployed that into 45 companies so far across 5 countries, roughly 12 sectors, over 200 founders at this point.
I'm Nyatta. I'm not from Latin America, I'm from Africa, but I fell in love with Latin America. First launched SoftBank's Latin America Fund in 2018, and now I've launched Bicycle Capital, which is a growth equity firm, $500 million growth equity firm focused on growth stage companies across Latin America, which mainly means Brazil and Mexico.
Hi, I'm Marco Camhaji. I'm a partner at Upload. Upload is a multi-stage firm investing from seed to Series B. We have right now $200 million in AUM, mostly investing in B2B pieces.
Thank you for introducing yourself. What's interesting about this panel is we have lead investors that are leading companies in Brazil, Mexico, both early stage and growth stage, and some of the macro trends are very different that create a different ecosystem. In 2020, 2021, and 2022, Latin America was the fastest growing region in the world for venture capital, and that created a lot of dynamics and actually some amazing outcomes. Nubank, the largest publicly traded fintech, was birthed and built in Brazil. Would love just to pose to the panel, kind of where do you think the ecosystem today is after this last boom of capital? Where's the opportunity, and what's the maturity of the market look like, both on early stage and growth stage?
No, sir?
Yeah, just to provide some context, I think you provided really great background, but overall what's been happening in Brazil is that from 2018 to 2020, the ecosystem was consistently growing. There was more capital being deployed. And then in 2021, all of a sudden we had almost $20 billion that was deployed. And that's more than the previous 5 years combined. So it was just this insane and rapid growth that catalyzed a lot of companies, a lot that have now worked out and a lot that have not worked out, and triggered the beginning of an ecosystem. And so what we see now is that as the ecosystem matures, more talent is being attracted to the region, both in terms of tech and not. So for example, we were just talking about the fact that the second biggest nationality at Stanford Business School right now is Brazilians, as opposed after Americans. And all of them want to go into entrepreneurship. So for the first time, we have talent really coming into the ecosystem. We have a capital cycle that's complete. So with investors covering the early stage, and then I think here on stage, actually, we have the complete cycle within itself. And then I think the last and biggest question, which examples like Nubank, which you just mentioned, are resolving, are exits and really kind of this stabilization of capital markets, M&As, and so on, which I believe the next few years are going to really be a great example of.
Although on the exits point, something people often don't understand about Latin America compared to other emerging markets is you've had a history of very successful and very large exits. From Mercado Libre, which is at this point, I don't know, like a 15-year-old, maybe more exit. It's almost a $100 billion company. Nubank recently, which is the world's most valuable fintech, it's $50 billion listed in New York. And several other examples which don't exist in Southeast Asia or India. Only China has produced things that big. And part of the reason is you have very big markets. Brazil and Mexico are big markets with purchasing power. So you have middle classes and small and medium businesses that can spend and support this amount of equity value creation. Brazil is probably the world leader in fintech. A quarter of the world's fintechs are created in LatAm, most of those in Brazil. So as an ecosystem, it has a real center of excellence, and that's not that well understood. And it's because you've had this cycle happen over the last 10 years plus. And so the ecosystem of founders is very mature and extremely high quality.
Yeah. Just to add on top of what Shu just mentioned here, what we do see is a generation of founders that already like exited their businesses, or like they were part of like management teams of like big companies, and they are starting their own like businesses, right? So right now what we see is this positive like flow of like founders coming to the market, launching new businesses in several industries. And mostly like they do have a global approach, right? So they are not like more targeting just the region itself or like one specific country. Usually what we see is they are like globally competitive. And that's what I believe like makes Latin America super attractive.
Absolutely. And an interesting point is many companies are started in the region and going global. For example, Gympass now rebranded to WellHub, which is a bicycle portfolio company, started in Brazil, now has revenue both in the US and Europe. And so the ambitions of the region is you can be a global company, and it has some of the most talented founders in the world, resilient and very used to navigating the challenges of being a founder in uncertain markets. I think that alone, the talent opportunity of founders that, are educated globally, but come back and know the market to really build the future. All of us, I think, are, big evangelists of Latin America. What would you say the average, maybe U.S. investor or U.S. profile person, what do you think that they miss, or what's something that they might get wrong about the region that you've heard in conversations?
We were talking about this before in the back, but there was a huge wave of capital into Latin America 10 years ago, and then it went away. And a lot of global allocators still have that 10-year-old mental model for the region. And when I'm on the road and my colleagues here on the road talking to people around the world, they tend to talk about currency crises, cartels, or if they're in their good mood, they talk about soccer. And that's LatAm in their minds. And none of this whole wave of what's been happening in the past 10 years is fresh for them. So a lot of it is educating on the opportunity and actually the stability macroeconomically of especially Brazil and Mexico. Not every country is Venezuela and Argentina. You also have Brazil and Mexico, which have their own tailwinds. So that refreshed macro narrative is often what people don't have in their heads. And part of our job, aside from investing, is educating on the whole region and how it should be reevaluated from a top-down allocator point of view.
And what are you seeing that's different from a trend or new entrepreneurs? What has changed? I know Maya was started about 6 years ago, and everyone on the panel has been investing for 6+ years, but what's different from sector diversity or the emergence of new opportunities that are very specific, let's say, to Brazil?
You guys are early stage, so better viewpoint.
So I think the main for Shu, you put it perfectly. And in my opinion, the biggest part of that education is actually on the size of the opportunities, right? So when we talk about Brazil, talk about Latin America, we're often talking about the difficulties, the instability, the currency, and all those things that you just mentioned. But we see those, and over the 6 years as it's only consolidated itself, we see those as actually massive opportunities. When we're talking about 200 million people in Brazil, 660 million people across Latin America as a region, every opportunity is naturally a massive opportunity. And so TAM is not a problem when we're talking about investing. It never really has been, especially considering that the companies that we're looking to invest in are solving, banking problems, the financial institutions, logistics, housing, and all of these different things. The big thing that has changed over time, and Marco alluded to this earlier, is the quality of founders that we're seeing in the region. So first of all, on the younger side, something like 70% of undergraduate students in Brazil want to go into tech and startups and entrepreneurship.
70%?
It's something bizarre, yeah.
Oh, wow.
On the more mature side, we now have these cycles happening where we have companies that have done exits, and the executives that were a part of the founding team, maybe they weren't the founders, but were part of the founding team, go out to start their own company. So at Maya, for example, 45% of our portfolio founders are actually second-time founders. And that just demonstrates how they're coming back to market. And then finally, the what I was mentioning, which is the stability of capital, which then really kickstarts this virtuous cycle of companies being founded, then exited, and then flushing the ecosystem with talent, which attracts capital, which then creates more examples and so on.
Absolutely. And from kind of our perspective, we would say the early stage ecosystem from a capital perspective is very robust. There's more local firms, there's global firms that are knowledgeable and smart that are investing in the region. Where would you say kind of throughout the ecosystem, is there a gap of capital?
Marco, you see all the pieces, so
Yeah.
maybe you're best positioned.
Yeah. So, I mean, what we see right now, like, is a more mature market in terms of like seed, Series A, like funds. So we do see that these funds, like, they are more prepared, and honestly, they are like in the third or fourth cycle, right? When compared like to the other funds, the growth stage funds, and actually Shu did like an amazing job here. We were just joking like that Shu actually created like a whole new market 4 or 5 years ago.
For better or worse.
For better, for sure. And now, like, we do see this movement of other funds trying to have like a local position, because this is also important, right? Back in the days, like we did see is what we used to call helicopter VCs. So the Sequoias, Tigers, like they would go to invest in Brazil, but they would make like this back and forth movement according to the conditions of the market, right? What we see right now is funds, they're like dedicated to the region. They have like boots in the ground. They have like a much better understanding of the markets, especially like Brazil and Mexico. And this is making like a huge change, like in terms of like the investment process, right? So.
Amazing. And how do you think about the region as a whole? Mexico and Brazil have the largest markets and largest populations, but do you look at Colombia, Argentina, etc.?
We do it.
I'll start because for us it's a little more clear, I think. So we're a $500 million growth fund, and so we need big outcomes for the fund to make sense. And a fund returning company, we have fewer of those just structurally, but it has to be able to attack a big market. And that's why Brazil and Mexico are our primary focus. Is 220 and 150 million people, big middle classes, spending power, all the things I said. But you do get founders from some other markets who are very good. And the advantage they have is they can experiment in their market, get the product right, and then go to Mexico or Brazil next. And in particular, Colombia, Chile, and Argentina have incredible, rich history of entrepreneurship. David Velez from Nubank that we've talked about a couple of times is Colombian. Rappi is a Colombian company. You have several Argentine companies that have been bought by blue chip US tech firms over the past 5 years, born in Argentina. But they all know that they need to go to Brazil or Mexico to scale those companies. So we focus on those two end markets, which, by the way, each have very interesting tailwinds. Mexico has nearshoring, which is this incredible tailwind for the market. And Brazil has essentially a commodity super cycle, largest food exporter, a lot of other natural resources, a 90% green grid in Brazil. So both of these economies have supporting factors beyond the fact that they have big populations that make them really attractive. So that's why we're focused there in particular. But at the early stage, I anticipate it might be different because the founders come from various places.
So just to give a bit of context, again, about 55% of VC dollars in Latin America is directed into Brazil, 25, probably more recently now, closer to 30, Mexico. And then there's a long tail, which are led by Colombia, then Chile and Argentina. The way that we see it is VC, both at the early and at the growth stage, is a game of outliers, right? We need to invest in the winners. And what we've seen across Latin America is that the winners are pan-regional. So you take Nubank is already in Mexico. Quintandar from Brazil has started to expand. And there are all these examples that Shu was mentioning of where they come to Brazil or Mexico. So at the end of the day, what we, at the early stage, need to guarantee that we do is that we see everything and then pick who we think is going to be the winner. Understanding that at some point, we can be instrumental in helping them come to Brazil or Mexico if necessary. And that's happened multiple times in our portfolio. I was actually just speaking earlier to someone, and we mentioned that nowadays all of our portfolio companies that started outside of Brazil, excluding Mexico, so the ones from Chile, Colombia, and Argentina, all of them have come into Brazil or Mexico, and those are now their biggest markets.
But the problems in LatAm actually like create a huge opportunity, right? So when we think about Argentina, for instance, or Venezuela with high inflation rates, this creates actually the environment to foster like new technologies, right? So when you think about like cross-border technologies or like crypto, which is super helpful for these countries with like high inflation rates, how they're gonna transact, like all these problems, they create like the environment to good founders that can actually solve that sort of issue. And when potentially they come to more evolved like markets such as Brazil and Mexico, they're well prepared to tackle the problems, right? So I do like this approach and this aspect of LatAm.
It's true. New Yorkers say if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. It's not true. You can't make it in Brazil. But if you can make it in Brazil and Argentina and Venezuela, you can definitely make it anywhere.
Absolutely. Resiliency is just built into life in the region. And so nothing better but what you want in the DNA of the entrepreneurs, building and enduring the challenge of building a company. To give people kind of a flavor of like the different types of business models or companies, would love maybe for each of you to just share one portfolio company that, for you really demonstrates kind of the value and the unique opportunity specifically in the region. Any company, really. You don't have to pick your favorite. So.
Any favorite kids? We only have 2 portfolio companies, so I'll make it easy. I'll go first. There's a company called Motu, which was our first investment, MOTTU. The Brazil motorcycle market is one of the largest in the world. You have a fleet of 13 million motorcycles in the country and 1 million sold a year. It's a huge market. 70% of that is dominated by Honda through the dealer network. So it's a very monopolistic, slow, sclerotic market. And Motu imports motorcycles from India. In fact, it assembles them in Brazil, imports the parts and assembles them in Brazil, and then leases them directly to couriers in Brazil who then use those motorcycles to do work, various kinds of logistics and delivery work. So a very classically disruptive model in the sense that it's focused on the lower end, very different business model from Honda. They can't quite match it. And they found incredible product market fit with this approach. The business grows 300 and something %, net income positive at the Series B stage, which again is not uncommon because there's such a dearth of capital. You have to be capital efficient in Latin America. You can't not be. And so you'll see a lot of companies at the Series A and B that are profitable, that are bootstrapped, that are still growing 300, 400, 500%. And so that's a company for us that exemplifies the opportunity, which is you have to do hard things, you have to do them capital efficiently, and you have to serve the middle of the pyramid in a very, very clear way. And if you do those things, then you can create a really powerful, difficult to replicate business. And that's Motu, which was our first investment.
I can mention Salu, which is a health tech in Brazil. They actually took advantage of a regulatory problem in Brazil. So every time you're going to hire or fire someone, this person has to go to a physician and take like a medical exam, which is crazy, but that's what happens in Brazil. They actually digitalized the whole process, took advantage of this regulation, and is growing like consistently, plus acquiring like data, which is super relevant for like managing the sinistrality of the employee base for companies. So right now what they're doing is they are partnering like with the companies to reduce the sinistrality and eventually like renegotiate with operators the cost of health insurance plans.
You can bring the example maybe of Fudo, FUDO in our portfolio. That's actually Argentine founders, but are already across the entire region. So really talking about pan-regional winners. They do software for restaurants, so Toast for Latin America. When we invested, they had a couple thousand restaurants. I think it was 2,000 restaurants. Now they have well into the 20, 30,000 restaurants, are growing also north of 200% per year. and really get into and when we talk about big problems being big opportunities, you look at the restaurant market across Latin America, and this is an extremely fragmented, extremely underserved market in all senses. So Fudo comes in as the one-stop shop for these restaurants, doing everything from coordinating and organizing their ordering and delivery to front office reservations, table management, order taking, to back office, ordering of stock, and then coordinates all of that, and then finally provides, on top of all this information, can do a much better underwriting of the restaurant or restaurant owner to provide them with credit and all kinds of other financial solutions. That's when we look at software that then verticalizes into fintech, which is a trend that has been very prevalent across Latin America.
And the unscripted connecting theme here is these are big pieces of GDP. I mean, it's food, it's transport and logistics, it's healthcare, by no pre-agreement. The interesting thing about companies in places like LatAm, unlike, say, San Francisco, is you're not making life a little better for 1% of the population. You're making life a lot better for 99% of the population. That is the opportunity.
Absolutely. We have just about 2 minutes left. And so we've heard a little bit about the types of companies being built in the region, the unique challenges that create tailwinds, how it's tied to global macro. Would love just to wrap up and ask each panelist about what excites you most about the opportunity ahead. I think you guys are seasoned enough. You've seen different cycles, whether it's 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. What excites you most about kind of the blank slate ahead?
So with all the regulation especially in this from the central bank, I still have a big bet on fintechs in Brazil. I do think that banks were revamped. So we have new bank as a case. We still have a huge opportunity in capital markets. So we do have this changing regulation that is supporting new thesis in investments, credit lines, different approaches for fund managers. So we are super bullish about this piece of the market.
I think in 2024, there's only one answer to the what are you excited about question, which is AI. Legitimately, the wonderful thing in LatAm about AI is there's no more talent constraint. You used to need 100 engineers who are really good to do something. Now you need one, and the other 99 are co-pilots. And that's changed everything. I can't overstate that. Anyone, anywhere can now build world-class products. And that opens up a much broader set of things to build, which is very exciting.
Yeah, maybe just to conclude, I think the thing that most excites me is that based on everything that we've been talking about here on the panel today, for me, it's not a matter of if there's going to be a next new bank, if the ecosystem will mature, if the enormous companies will continue coming out of Latin America. It's just a matter of when. And everything has indicated that we're very much on that positive trend. And I think the quality of the investors here and all the work that we've been doing and the interest in Latin America in general is a demonstration of that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Lara, Shu, and Marco for joining us. If we can give them a nice round of applause.